Hey guys, welcome to Lather Talk. This is John, and we have quite the episode for you today. Today we're talking to Will Carius of Barrister and Mann, as well as the newly launched Berceuse Parfums. Now you'll hear us launch right into the conversation, talking about the packaging of the new perfume Allegretto 7.2, as Gerard and I had both ordered samples, and they had just arrived prior to the interview. So we'll talk about all the details of the packaging, the customer experience, and the story behind Allegretto 7.2, as well as the formation of Berceuse Parfums. We'll also get to talk to Will about his in-depth knowledge about fragrances, his love for fragrances, and what it's meant to his life thus far. He provided us with such wonderful, detailed, and personal stories, and we can't wait to share them with you. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and now, onto the episode.
Like, this is the most elaborate design for a sample I've ever experienced, and I'm just like, it's a good start.
Well, I gotta tell you, I mean, like, the whole idea was to make everything that comes from Berceuse is supposed to feel like a present to yourself. And the packaging for the full bottles is actually dramatically more elaborate. It's I mean, I won't even spoil it. I want you to see it because I'm really proud of it. It took years to design, but I mean, like, everything about this was because we finished the fragrance and then started on the unboxing experience, and the whole idea was to make it feel special. And so and as I said in my AMA, and as I've said other places, is that, you know, this is not about a fragrance that's going to get you compliments or a fragrance that's going to get you laid or whatever. This is about you buying a fragrance that's important to you. And, like, you probably won't love all of them. And that's fine. Like, I have said from the outset through Barrister and Mann that I don't want you to love everything. But, you know, so long as you can find one, that's what really matters. And you know, that's the point of the samples, but it should still feel special, and it should feel like a little bit of a luxury. And so that was the thinking behind the design. I wanted to use as few different pieces of packaging as possible. And I know that sounds ridiculous looking at it, because you open it up and it's got the tissue paper, which is completely biodegradable and compostable. And you've got the box that holds the sample, and that's really to protect the sample. Like, I hate those little card things, those foldy cards that you get. We considered it, and I just hate them. They feel so cheap and unfinished. And we went for the little boxes. I actually got the idea from Frederick Malle, because that's how they do their samples. Okay. And I think Xerchoff and Barreto do the same thing. There are a couple of different companies that use little sample boxes as opposed to the cards, and I just hate the cards. So, but this just feels like a more finished idea in my view. So there's this little box that the samples come in, and I mean, the box itself is just cardboard. It will eventually break down, and it's also meant to hold, say, you know, if we decide to do like a 10 milliliter spray or something, the dimensions of the box were designed such that we can fit sprayers, the vials, in a box that size, and, you know, we'll just have like an insert made to hold them in place so nothing happens to them. But the full size packaging, everything is removable. You can break everything down. And the idea behind this was that you could reuse the box that it comes in as, you know, depending on who you are, you could use it as like a jewelry box, or you could use it, you know, to hold books or something, or you can use it for all different purposes. Like, you can completely dismantle the thing and just use it as a box. And so the idea was that if we couldn't make it break down, then at least we could make it reusable. So that was the idea. But the box that the full bottles come in, so there's a whole big box, and that actually holds the bottle in place. And then there's sort of a smaller, what's called a setup box, and that has a magnetic closure, and like, that's the box you would actually see on a shelf if you were to walk into a fragrance store and see a Berceuse fragrance. Like, that's what you'd see on a shelf. That is pretty tough. It's pretty solidly made. And actually, those are what I'm waiting for right now. But the thinking is that if you want to protect your fragrance from light, because light is not great for perfume, or if you want to travel with it or something and make sure that it doesn't get smashed, you can put it back in this box and just kind of carry it around that way.
That is a lot of thinking into the packaging. And yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Gerard.
No, because you know what, like. This is kind of like, you know, people in the cult of Apple, the unboxing experience, you know, of everything, where is the moment you get it, just whether it's like the minimalist aspect to it, you know, like there are YouTube channels with millions of people, you know, like just revolve around the unboxing experience of a product. Yep. And so, you know, if that's how this starts, then like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm totally down with that, you know?
Yeah.
You know, some people will just go in and just like, you know, just rip it apart to shreds and we won't know for the better. And then there are some people that just say, like this in itself, I haven't even sprayed my first spray yet. And I'm already having a pleasurable experience, you know, just unboxing this.
Good.
Right?
And that's what I wanted. I wanted every little thing to feel special. And like this whole thing came about because I bought a bottle of perfume from Chanel, because I wanted to see how the biggest perfume house in the world ships its perfume. And they sent me this kind of craptastic box that was just full of like mushed up tissue paper, and it was torn and it was sloppy. And so I sent them an email. I was like, well, what is this? I was like, you are the gold standard of luxury. Like, this should be better. And they sent me this very strange, like oddly stilted, awkward email back. And they're like, thank you for buying the beautiful Bois de Zile. We will take your feedback into account. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, and so I wrote a review and they promptly deleted it. And I sent them another email. I was like, well, this isn't cool. And they just completely blew me off. They never answered me. And I really felt like they just didn't give a damn. Like they had gotten my money and that was it. And I, like, then and there, I swore that no Berceuse customer would ever feel that way. And no one would ever feel like we were not interested in talking to them. No one would ever feel like we had abandoned them, like we were no longer interested because now we had their money. Like, that is not at all what I want a Berceuse customer experience to be like. I want it to feel like we are there for you if you need us, but we won't bug you if you don't want to talk to anybody.
That's pretty bad customer experience. It's
awful.
I mean, when you're just, you know, at that point, are you a luxury house or are you just like this massive machine that just has to chug, keep on going?
And that was really how it felt. It felt like they cared about, you know, maybe the uppermost 1% of their clientele, the people who walk into a Chanel boutique and drop $100,000 and they'll bat an eye. And the rest of us unwashed are just sort of a revenue stream to keep the rest of it going. And I was like, ew, okay. Don't think Coco Chanel would be into this, but whatever.
For me, you know, as far as, you know, this goes, it was just definitely unexpected. I thought when I got the box, I kind of have it right here, you know, and like, I'm just like, oh, we have the hello here. And then when I open it, you know, for people to see just this wonderfully, like, you know, nicely designed notes in harmony. I have the paper that you had mentioned down here on the floor. It was chattering, so I'm not going to touch it on the mic or anything like that. But like you said, like you only get one chance to make a first impression. And so I think that's just going to very much communicate really well to future customers.
Well, that's good to hear. Honestly, you're among my first like real feedback regarding the entire experience. So I'm like taking mental notes here as we talk about.
Well, John got it too the other day.
Yeah.
So
John hadn't told me anything yet, though.
Yeah. And so.
No, I agree with you, Gerard. I think for me, because I mentioned that, you know, I enjoyed the art on the inside, but there's something fun, whimsical, almost childlike about it, right? Because it's like an illustration that would just easily belong in a children's storybook, as but it's also classy, professional, and totally at home with a perfume company. So I don't know. It actually is packaging that evoked an emotion, and I can't say that's that's usually the case for most of the things I'm unboxing. Like, ooh, for electronics or whatever like that. I know that's a different industry and whatnot, but
yeah, but I mean, Apple sets the standard for unboxing experience. Like, when Steve Jobs was still alive, everybody took notes about how he would give product announcement presentations. Like, they were studied, broken down second by second, gesture by gesture, and Apple. I mean, obviously Steve Jobs is gone now, but Apple has stuck with that intense commitment to the experience. And their unboxing experience has been the gold standard for a long time. And they made elegant minimalism a thing in a way that I think no one else had ever really done. Because, like, you remember in the 90s when you would order a very expensive computer, it would be like $2,000 or $3,000, and it would come in and it would be like an old school CRT monitor, and the thing would be heavy as hell, and you'd be like trying to set it up, and it was just a nightmare, but it felt very industrial. Apple was the first company to really make it feel luxurious. They made it felt like a lifestyle, like you were part of a community, and that was really cool. And it's still really cool.
I mean, Cult of Mac is legitimately, I think, a website. It's a thing in itself, and I don't know of any other, at least tech company, that has that kind of following. Definitely not. I mean, it's been what, 12, 13 years since the iPhone was released, and you still have people lining up days before the launch of it. And I'm just like, and that's it. And they're happy. They're just like so happy to be like those people in line. And it just goes to show the kind of attention that they give, like their customers and everything like that, and the devotion of their customers as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, how did the seeds get planted, and how did you get to this point with the launch of Allegretto 7.2?
That's a long story. So I had this idea. I don't actually know how I came upon this idea. It just it was one of those things that occurred to me one day, and one of those ideas that I just couldn't put down. It was this thinking that there's a lot of overlap artistically between music and fragrance. I mean, like, almost even down to the terminology, different combinations of notes that produce different effects are known as accords. Like there's a definite shared lexicon between music and perfumery. And so it just made a lot of sense to me. And I thought about it. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I could do a lot with this idea. So I just sort of let it percolate for a couple of years. And around like, and I had already sort of committed to the idea of eventually turning it into a brand, maybe. I kind of floated it on this design website called 99 Designs, and they sent me a logo, and it actually looked pretty cool, but it just wasn't unique enough. And so I shelved the idea for a while, and I had trouble coming up with a name, and I went back and forth, and eventually I settled on Berceuse, which is the French word for lullaby. And I went with that because I could think of nothing as innocent, really, as sweet and innocent and just pure as a piece of music that is sung or played to help a child go to sleep. And when I was a little kid, perfume and music, fragrance and taste overlap a whole lot, right? If you lose your sense of smell, your sense of taste just goes out the window. But so my parents were bakers when I was a kid. They were professional bakers, and my mother wore Calvin Klein Obsession. This was before they reformulated it and ruined it. Now it's garbage. So I've bought her a few vintage bottles since. And, you know, we used to go on long road trips, and she would listen to music. And so my mother has a real thing for music. My grandfather had a real thing for music. And so it just sort of came together. And like, I always thought about fragrance and music and taste and a whole lot, just the whole idea of that part, you know, the intangible senses, I suppose you'd call them. And so it was this idea that, like I said, percolated for some time. And then, you know, I settled on the name Berceuse, and I was because I wanted something that just expressed a kind of innocent purity that was not present in the fragrance world, really still is not present in the fragrance world, because fragrance is sold on sex. You know, at least designer fragrances are sold on sex. Like Terre d'Hermes, Dior Fahrenheit, Cool Water, you read the copy for any of them, and the copywriter who wrote it is telling you this stuff is gonna get you laid if you spray it on. Like Axe built their entire brand on that. Like, remember the commercials where some sweaty high schooler would spray on a can of Axe and just like douse himself in the stuff, and women would come running from miles around and just like beat down the doors and swarm all over him. Like, that's how fragrance is sold.
I would like to interject really quick. At the same time that Axe launched, there was another company called Bod.
I remember that.
And their marketing campaign was, you would spray this stuff on, and like hundreds of muscular, sweaty men would show up into the picture. Yep. Like you were like that was what you were aspiring to be. And no offense to anyone like who leans in that way, but it was just literally the opposite of what Axe did, and they folded very quickly there soon after.
Surprised. But I mean, like, no matter the target market, fragrance is sold on sex. And a lot of niche fragrances, niche fragrance, maybe we're veering away a little bit from that now. But like the independent fragrance brands that aren't intrinsically connected to their perfumers or proprietors in some way, like Andy Tower and Tower Perfumes are one and the same, right? Victor Wong and Zoologist are one and the same. But there are other fragrance brands that are messier. You know, they're more corporate. And a lot of times the copy for those is very sexually oriented. Even as much as they try to be subtle about it, they're trying to convey the idea that spraying this stuff on is going to make you more attractive. And they use various ways to do that. They talk about the exotic, seductive resins and, you know, all of these beautiful things that they put in. And it's ridiculous, frankly, because, you know, for one thing, that has never happened to anyone. And like, there's no scientific basis for it in humans. Like, it's just ridiculous. But also, it's just tiresome. Like, can't we do something else? Can't we think about something else as a species other than banging and killing each other? Like, you can't sell a fragrance based on war, so they sell it on sex. Although,
because it sells.
Exactly.
Sex sells.
But you know what sex sells? Sex sells sex. Sex doesn't necessarily sell anything else other than sex. Now, that works great for fragrance because theoretically, you know, the idea is that you spray something on and you're going to have sex. Like, that's the point. But, you know, beyond that, the appeal sort of starts to get fuzzy. But it's just, perfume is an extremely complex art form, right? Like music, like painting, like sculpture, like literature, you know, I mean, it's an art form. And so, but there aren't only, like, if all paintings were porn, we would be bored, right? If all sculptures were just like blow up dolls, we would be bored. If all food was, you know, licking whatever off somebody, we would be bored. Like people would die of starvation because they just wouldn't want to eat. Perfume is the only art form that suffers from this, I think, this fixation with the carnal. The thing about it is that it just seemed like it was a hole in the market. It was a gap. This idea of ars gratia artis, art for art's sake, fragrance for fragrance's sake. The idea that you're wearing something not because it's gonna have people stripping off their clothes in front of you, but because it's nice. And so I let this, like I said, getting back to the story, I let this idea percolate for a few years, and I had chosen a name, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And I was studying for the bar, and I was living in Roslindale at the time, and I was still ordering a lot of perfume samples, and I still order a fair number of perfume samples because people produce a lot of perfume still, more perfume than ever, really. And I had heard about this new Italian perfumer who was making waves and was producing work just unlike anything anybody else was doing. And I was like, all right, well, this sounds pretty cool. And then I found out he was an architect, and I was like, all right, well, that's even cooler, whatever. And there's a lot of interesting overlap in perfume. Like a few people are lawyers, myself included. Andy Tower and Spiros Drosopoulos are scientists. Andy Tower has a PhD in molecular biology, I think. Spiros Drosopoulos has a PhD in neuroscience. I think it's neuroscience. Antonio's an architect. A bunch of different people come to perfume from a bunch of different places. But anyway, so the second fragrance that he released and the second one that I tried was Mai, which I absolutely fell in love with. It is still one of my 5 favorite fragrances. It is, I think I once described it as genius on a supernova scale. It's just brilliant. And it reworks classic perfume in a way that no one had really done yet. And it's really, really cool. It's this big animalic, musky civet chypre thing. And Antonio actually, so far as I know, doesn't consider it a chypre. So I smelled Mai and I fell in love with it and bought a bottle like on the spot, terrified that the IFRA would change their regulations and force Mai to be altered in some capacity, or it would be, he wouldn't make it, and that they would stop making the fragrance and it would disappear. So I wore it a lot because I studied for the bar, and it was the record winter in Boston when we got, 11 feet of snow or some horrible thing. It was awful. And so I wore a lot of perfume because I needed something to keep from going insane. And so like 4 or 5 months later, I decided that I was going to do something with the idea for Berceuse. And what I realized was that without knowing it, I had been waiting for someone that I felt could do it. That I felt would be interested enough and was interesting enough to work with me on what in some respects is a radical idea. And so I sent Antonio an email and I said, I really love your work. I said, Mai is a masterpiece. And I said, I would love for you to create a perfume for us. And I said, I have no timeline. I have no budget. I said, it'll cost what it costs. We will charge what we have to charge. I said, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we adhere to this idea and that it's special. And he said, and so we had a long Skype call. And Italy, I think, is about 7 hours ahead of us. So that would make them 10 hours ahead of you, Gerard. Mm-hmm. And so it was, I was like early-ish morning. And so we talked for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And he seemed really into the idea. And I was like, okay, well, this is cool. And then so we hung up the phone and I didn't hear from him for 3 months. And I went, oh God. oh God, I told this guy my idea. He's going to take it and run with it. I'm screwed. What the hell do I do? And then 3 months later, I get this package in the mail. There's like a little box, and Antonio's so funny because he always sends a little card with like a little note on it. And I don't know if either of you has ever bought a Vogue fragrance, but the logo is what I thought was a beetle, but I've come to learn since that it's actually a stink bug. So anyway, this little box arrives, and it says, Antonio Gardoni on it, and I went, oh, well, okay, I guess this is going to work out after all. And I opened it up, and there were 2 vials. And the way that this went was that he would submit 2 or 3 drafts at a time. And a lot of times they were variations on the same idea. So he would take it 2 different ways and ask me which one I liked better, and then we'd go from there. Which is not that unusual in perfumery, but was not something that I had ever really experienced before. So that was really cool. And then I sent him an email back, and I let him know what I thought, and he was like, okay. And then I didn't hear from him for another couple of months, and then I got another package in the mail. And this was how it went for 3 years. It went on and on and on for 3 years. And so, I obsessed about every little part of it. What is this note? What is that note? Is this right? Is this not right? Does this have enough? Is there enough vetiver? Is it dark enough? Is it light enough? Is it too heavy? Is it too strong? Is it this? Is it that? So, and I'm sure he was ripping his hair out by the end of it. And when I met him, he was bald, but still, maybe he was ripping his beard hair out because he's got like a beard. So anyway, we come to like the 28th or 29th submission. And he's like, you know what? Because my mother and I went to London in 2018 for the Art and Olfaction Awards. And he said, you know what? I'm going to be in London. He said, I'm going to be there for the A&O. I'll bring it to you. I went, okay. So he brings it to me, and it's like 80 in London in April, which is the weirdest thing. Like it was so strange because I'd never been to Britain before. And everybody I met was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry about the weather. I had never had an entire population apologize for their weather before, but that was a different occurrence. But anyway, so it was hot. It was like 80, 85. Everybody was walking around in t-shirts, and Antonio hands me this vial of this very rich, very smoky, rooty thing. And I go, should I spray this on? He's like, yes, you should. So I sprayed it on, and we were standing in Bloom Perfumery in Covent Garden, and I sprayed it on, and I went, yeah, this is it. And I asked him to try one thing for me just because I thought it'd be an interesting idea. He's like, I don't know about this. I was like, just humor me. And so he tried it, and he sent me the brief or sent me the draft, and I smelled it. I went, nope, never mind. Antonio was right. Scrap that one. And so that was where we stopped. We stopped at number 28, and that was it. And I got it, and then having it compounded was a nightmare. And having it go through IFRA certification was a nightmare. I haven't actually submitted it for certification yet, but I have a certificate of compliance. And so we dealt with the compounding lab, and the first formula was wrong. Like it was way over the vetiver. The vetiver was way over IFRA restrictions. And I went, okay. So I went back to Antonio. I was like, Antonio, I got a problem. I was like, it doesn't work. Like I can't sell this in Europe. And he went, oh crap, I'm sorry. So 2 weeks later, I get another package in the mail. And he's like, I fixed it. And I said, okay. So I smelled it, and I smelled its predecessor, and I was like, honestly, I don't know that I would be able to tell the difference blind. But this one complies. Like this one it was dead on compliant. And so, I went back to the compounding lab, and they made it for me and shipped me 4 kilos of it, and it's been sitting in my lab ever since.
For the benefit of our listeners who might not be as familiar with the fragrance world, I'm just wondering if you could just slightly just kind of unpack the phrase, the terminology for compounding, and
Oh,
also just go a little bit into like IFRA and kind of those standards,
yeah.
because
In the United States, we are not really subject to fragrance regulation or restriction in any major capacity. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act does not really grant the FDA authority to regulate fragrance materials the way that it can regulate food or drugs. So this is really the result of lobbying on the part of the fragrance industry more than anything else. And they formed this sort of amalgamated watchdog group in the early 70s called the IFRA, the International Fragrance Association. I've heard it referred to as a few other things, but it's the International Fragrance Association. And so originally it was just like the big 6 chemical manufacturers / perfume houses who had gotten together to regulate themselves so that governments wouldn't do it for them, and possibly do a lot of damage in the name of public health. People who are not familiar with the IFRA tend to not trust it, because they're like, well, you can't trust them to regulate themselves. But I will tell you that the IFRA is extraordinarily careful and exacting about the materials that it tests. It tests everything. They regulate everything. I mean, the IFRA Code of Practice is probably 400 pages. It's huge. And it goes into levels that you can use of, vetiver oil or phenethyl alcohol, or, any other fragrance material. It goes into what level, how much you can use in a body cream, how much you can use in a perfume, how much you can use in a hair pomade. And they're all different numbers. So the IFRA is sort of an industry regulation group. Nowadays, they've kind of folded to pressure from the EU, which in turn folds to pressure from its constituents. And so the EU has taken a more active role in what the IFRA does these days. But originally, it was purely an industry group. But in order to sell perfume in the European Union legally, you have to comply with IFRA standards. And so there are various labs in the United States that will make raw fragrance for you, so something that you would dilute down with alcohol, and then they'll issue a certificate saying that it complies with IFRA standards. And so this process is known as compounding. And so the idea is that they take all of these different materials and blend them together into a finished perfume compound. And so it's that compound that is then diluted with alcohol and allowed to age for a given period of time. Truthfully, Allegretto 7.2 has the longest what's called maceration period I have ever seen. After it's been compounded, it matures. I mature it in glass because the original stock of the fragrance actually was lost because the canister that they shipped it to me in developed a hairline crack, and the whole thing leaked out into the lab. Thankfully, the lab replaced it at no charge, but it was really, really scary. So now I mature them in glass because the idea is that, and like we tested it, there's nothing corrosive in it. I have no idea what caused this. We figure it was just a manufacturing defect, because like they went back and ripped the whole formula apart trying to figure out what had happened, and it's not the fragrance. There was just something wrong with the canister. So anyway, I mature the fragrance in glass. Allegretto is matured for 10 weeks. Normally, fragrances are not aged for more than like 6 to 8 weeks. Allegretto's perfume concentrate, its compound, is matured for 10 weeks and then macerated in alcohol for an additional 8 weeks. So, yeah, it's 4.5 months. Yeah. And so the original diluted perfume is sitting in a glass canister in my lab and has been there it'll have been there a year on February 15th.
So just kind of maybe speaking, for most of our viewers who are from the wet shaving world, in that 4.5 months, in that 18 weeks, like what's happening?
Basically what's happening is that, so like an essential oil is not just one pure substance, right? It's made up of usually hundreds of different materials. Like rose oil is 470 something different materials, give or take. A lot of times what's happening as it sits there is it's very much like aging whiskey or wine. It's undergoing internal chemical processes that are smoothing it out, increasing its longevity. Truthfully, that is beyond the exact mechanics of that are beyond my knowledge base. That's something that perfume chemists, I'm sure, study in great detail, but the actual processes that macerating perfume undergoes are not something that I really am all that acquainted with. But I do know that maceration and maturation are both necessary, because if you just like pour raw concentrate into alcohol, or the other way around, depending on how you compound it, and pop it into a bottle, it could very well smell very different 6 months down the line. And at that point, you're going to piss people off, because they're going to spray something that is not what they bought, and they're not going to be happy about it.
With like the theme of music kind of being, like a center point for Berceuse, and in this case, for Allegretto 7.2. I know that it's after Beethoven's 7th Symphony. Why that piece? So like what, why that piece in particular? Was that always the musical piece that was going to be the first fragrance?
Yes.
And things like that.
So, through the course of the development of the house, I've developed a methodology for how the perfumes are commissioned. And I actually laid this out in full detail on the front page of the website, because I want people to know how these are put together. And so what we do, the idea now is that I have a list of 13, I want to call them pieces of music, but in some cases they were like stretches of music, because like the ending sequence of Abbey Road is one of them. No one has claimed that, don't worry. And the idea is that each of these pieces of music is important to either myself or my mother, who co-owns Barrister and Mann, and thus co-owns Berceuse with me. And so the way it works is that I go to a perfumer whose work I really like, and I kind of pitch the idea to them, and they, if they're interested, then I send them the list, and they choose a piece. And once they've chosen a piece, then it's theirs, and no one else works on it unless, maybe they back out or something, at which point the piece goes back up for grabs. But it's got to be something that speaks to them and speaks to us. And so it's got to be emotionally important, and there are a variety of things that can make a piece of music emotionally important. I ended up adding another piece to a list last May when I had to put my dog to sleep. So they can be there for happy reasons, they can be there for sad reasons. There are a lot of different ways that they can come to be on the list. Antonio was not offered that latitude, largely because it was so much earlier in the process. And so I went to Antonio and asked him specifically to create a fragrance based on the second movement of Beethoven's 7th, which is a piece that my mother and I both absolutely love, and has had sort of a resounding effect on my life. When I was on the radio in college, and at one point played all 9 of Beethoven's symphonies over the course of several days. And I actually played the 7th Symphony twice. And Beethoven remains my favorite of the classical composers. I find the man absolutely fascinating. I took a course on his life in college, and his works resonate with me for reasons that I don't entirely understand. But the second movement of the seventh, above all, is perhaps the one that I always think of the most, and so it would make a great perfume. Like, it was, I figured if we were going to prove the concept, then the way to prove the concept was with a masterpiece. And so I chose one of the greatest musical masterpieces of all time. And so that was kind of how it ended up. And then I don't know that Antonio would have, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but I'm not entirely certain that he would have taken on the project had I brought him something more modern. Because other perfumers with whom I've worked have selected more modern pieces of music, which is very interesting to me. But Antonio, a lot of respects, has a real thing for tradition. At least that's the impression that I've gotten from the man. And so, taking him something that's kind of timelessly a timeless musical classic, something that will always be a grand masterpiece of music, in retrospect, was probably the most appropriate thing that we could have done.
It's interesting because as you've been kind of explaining everything, like how being a masterpiece, being a symphony and everything, that's kind of like how all of the notes come together, whether there's something that's more prominent voice, more prominent tone, something that just adds a very little bit, but without it wouldn't hold up in a certain sense. Would you find like those kind of or that, I guess, analogy or that comparison kind of apt as far as music and fragrance is concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, perfect example. Zoologist Bat, the now tragically discontinued zoologist Bat, is premised largely on the idea of like damp caves and bats and guano and mango or banana or whatever. I don't remember what fruit Ellen actually tried to recreate. Anyway, the point is that it incorporates a material called geosmin, which is the smell of damp earth after rain. It's literally the smell of petrichor. It's a chemical distress signal released by spores in the soil. And it's extraordinarily powerful. I think it's one of the strongest, one of the most detectable molecules by the human nose, which is saying something, I gotta tell you. And I think the nose can detect geosmin down to like 4 parts per trillion. This stuff is incredibly strong. Without geosmin, Bat would be completely different. I don't know how much geosmin is in the original Bat. My guess is not very much. I will say that like it's likely well below 1%. But if you were to remove that tiny quantity, you would completely change the fragrance. And music is the same way. Like, speaking about Beethoven in particular, like that the second movement has that very low measured progression, the da 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 da. But that's not just one instrument. It's not just a cello. It's an entire string section just done very quietly. If you were to remove, say, the violin from that progression, the symphony would be very different.
I think what connects the two is emotion, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
and Beethoven's compositions, there is emotion, no doubt, behind those pieces. So I'm just wondering what kind of what your thoughts are on fragrance and emotion.
Oh, okay. This is a big thing. There's a fragrance made by Latison, which has now been purchased by, I believe, Estee Lauder owns Latison now. It doesn't matter. So far as I know, they haven't changed it. It's called Zing, D-Z-I-N-G, exclamation point. The exclamation point is important. Zing is the smell of a circus. Like, almost literally. It smells like wood chips and animal poop and caramel corn and warm cardboard and cotton candy and all of these things. It and peanuts, and it I own a bottle of it. For a while I thought they had discontinued it, and I was devastated. When I was a little kid, my father worked in addition to working as a baker, he also worked as a contractor. And he used to work in New Jersey and commute back and forth between New Jersey and upstate New York. So I didn't see him a whole lot. He'd be gone for like 4 or 5 days, then he'd be back for 2 days or something, and then he'd have to go back and do a job. At the time, this little circus used to come around to one of the local colleges. And they just performed in the gym. I mean, like, it wasn't like I don't think SUNY Oneonta even has a performance hall that could accommodate them otherwise. Like, they have they have stages and that kind of thing, but they don't have anything that could accommodate a circus. So they did it in the gym. And we used to get tickets, and we'd go, and it would just be Dad and myself. And that was one of my favorite times as a child. I still remember it in vivid detail. I remember the smells. I remember this was when they had elephants. I remember they had elephants, and they had, it was a real circus. It wasn't a huge circus, but it was a real circus. I first came upon Zing as a perfume when I read Luca Turin's perfume guide. I had never heard of such a thing. I had no idea. This was early on in my fragrance career. I had no idea that you could capture this kind of thing in fragrance. It never occurred to me. And so I was captivated by the concept, and I made it a mission to smell it. And it's not terribly common. Like, even like Latizon has dramatically decreased production of Zing, but even then it was not one of their more common fragrances, but it was definitely one of their best ones. But it's a weird idea. Like, who wants to smell like a circus? Let me tell you something. It is unquestionably one of the greatest masterpieces in all of perfume. And Olivia Giacobetti, who created it for Latizon, has assigned a bunch of different fragrances for the house. And now she works as the in-house perfumer for Lubin. But I don't know. I would love to know what the brief was like, and I'd love to have been present at during the process to compose it, because the first time I opened that bottle and I sprayed it on a piece of blotter paper and I held it to my nose, it was like I was 7 years old all over again. And I cried. I actually cried when I smelled it, and I remember it so vividly, and it just brought the whole experience back in a way that I thought I had lost. And so that was my first real introduction to the idea that fragrance is tied to to emotion in a way that a lot of other things are not. And I've had this experience as a perfumer as well. I've had people write me emails and let me know that something that I created is very important to them for, sometimes it's a lost loved one, sometimes it's a childhood place, but there's a thing in literature and also in perfume what's known as a Proustian moment. The famous playwright Proust discussed dipping a Madeleine cookie in tea and how it brought him back to his childhood. That simple experience brought him, it was, it all came rushing back, much like when I smelled Zing for the first time. And so it's often referred to in those terms when somebody discusses the emotional impact of a fragrance. But this is something that is written into perfume's DNA. Like, this is something that perfumers have been striving to capture for over a century. The greatest fragrances of all time are the fragrances that remind us of when we were happy. And in the kind of blissfully pure happiness that only childhood can really provide. I mean, like, even if you had a miserable childhood, there are moments, there are moments of respite in miserable childhoods that can be resurrected by these kinds of experiences. And that is what many perfumers strive to capture, I think. Like, that's the holy grail of perfumery. The greatest compliment in all of fragrance is to have someone cry when they smell your work. And I know that sounds sadistic, and I don't mean it that way. What I'm saying is that to have created something that resonates with someone on such a deep emotional level that they can't even hold it back, that to me is the greatest compliment I could ever receive. And I have actually, I'm sorry, I just want to say this. I have actually written to Madame Jacobetti telling her about what an effect her work had on my life. And she didn't answer. I couldn't get in touch with her directly. I wrote it to Laban, and they said they would pass it along to her. So she didn't answer, but I wanted her to know about it, because if it were me, I would want to know.
As your beautiful story. Like, and here's the thing, like, you mentioned those things, and I, like, personally have probably experienced it in a different way. It just reminded me of the classic scene in the Disney Pixar movie Ratatouille.
Mm-hmm.
Where the critic, who's just this stern skeleton of a man, sits down, sees the ratatouille, and he takes his first bite, and in about like a 30-second no verbal thing, it just takes him back to his childhood. It's his mom's table. You see, like it's just on a farm and everything, and his mom's there, and she spoons her childhood ratatouille there, and you just see just the look on his face, the comfort, all of it. And they didn't have him say a single word in that moment. And then they bring him back to the present, and what happens? Like, he drops the spoon, and he's just like stunned in the moment. And it's a great scene. It's probably my favorite scene in that movie, because it did so much without saying anything. Right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, I don't know if I just try to recall, do I have any of those moments, whether it's with my parents or anything like that, I think so classic, growing up, my dad would just wear Fabergé by Brut, Fabergé and stuff like that. And so I associate that smell with just my dad.
Yep.
That's it. Right. And everything after I got the sample of Allegretto, I kind of told you, I don't really have I guess an extensive, even amateur, background in fragrance, but I'm into food, and so because at the same time, so many of my memories, come, happen at the dinner table,
right.
at the table, and in the same thing, we're just all those notes come together, and I can smell my dad's cooking. He's the cook of the family growing up, and it just takes me back. It just takes me to those moments. So I think that's it's such a simple idea, but I mean, who does it? In this case, Zing did it so wonderfully that it brought tears to your eyes, when you smell it. And I think that in the future, we can only hope to to elicit such emotion.
Yeah. It's something to strive for. I mean, like, all artists, I think, strive to elicit emotion. Like, that's arguably one of the fundamental points to making art.
Correct.
But cooking and fragrance can do it in a way that other things cannot. And music too. I really, now that because, like, you know, if there's a song that reminds you of someone, you know, say something your mother sang to you when you were a child or something like that would definitely have the same effect. But like I said, the three in what I refer to as the intangibles, the sense of taste, smell, hearing, these things that you can't really describe and that we probably don't experience exactly the same way from person to person, but they're so intrinsically tied to memory. And it doesn't necessarily have to be perfume. Like you said, it could be food, it could be music, but it's that same kind of idea, that embedded memory, that is really important.
Well, I mean, I think that's just a really powerful story. And Gerard, that was the same exact picture that came in my mind. Is that scene in Ratatouille?
It's a great scene.
It's so
great
good.
Scene.
It's so good. And as you're talking about how the other arts can do it, we might as well just keep going in the Pixar thread, because in Coco.
Yeah. Oh yes.
In Coco, with the scene with the grandma, I cried in that scene.
Oh my God. Like a baby.
Yeah, because my paternal grandmother kind of lived with us for a little bit, and then was always in my life growing up. And she passed away a few years ago. But with that is like, it's fragrance, but fragrance via cooking. So she cooked all the time. My mother's cooking, excellent cook as well. Well, there's certain things like jasmine tea, certain things being steamed.
Yep.
My family's Taiwanese, so certain like star anise and like soy sauce and rice wine, that combination's like, that is family. That is like, that goes back generations, right? It goes beyond the here and now. And yeah, so I guess I should reframe it that way, because it's not even just fragrance and emotion. I feel like that's almost too superficial, because what you described with with your scent memory, right? It's not one emotion. It's combined. So, because you mentioned you didn't see your father, for stretches of time. So, there's happiness, joy, there's sadness and longing, and it's so complex. And I think that's awesome that you found a fragrance that transports you there.
The next time I see you, I will bring a vial of it. I want you to smell it.
I'd be very interested. I mean, and knowing the story behind it too, it's that's just amazing. So I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
absolutely. It's one of my favorite stories about perfume, actually, because it's like that Ratatouille thing, and I honestly I love Ratatouille. It's my favorite Pixar film, and like I always realized that those were the same thing, but I'd never actually laid them up side by side before. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is almost exactly the same experience.
Question. I'm just wondering if you could share, did you have like some highlights from 2019, whether it be releases or events that happened related?
2019 was a rough year, man.
Oh.
The Maggard meetup was cool. We unveiled Terror, which was a lot of fun. My mother and I were like, well, people are asking us to bring back Arctique, and I was like, I really don't want to bring back Arctique, because making Arctique is really unpleasant, because adding menthol to soap causes it to vaporize, and so it burns your eyes terribly, and your whole face goes numb. And when you're adding that much menthol to things, like I can only imagine what Ron Weeb at Chiseled Face and Rod Levin at Sterling go through every time they make, Cryogen or the glacial series. Like I wouldn't want to go through that all year long. That's just horrifying. Like I made it in July one time, and like there was like a fly buzzing around the lab, and I added the menthol to the soap, and the thing just dropped dead. And I'm like, that's wow, okay. I don't know how I feel about that. But anyway, so I didn't want to make Arctique again. So I thought it would be cool to do something based on the terror and, this kind of creeping, chill kind of idea. And so that was really cool. And people seemed to really dig the branding and the packaging and the idea and the whole thing. So that was neat because I wasn't entirely sure that people were going to go for it. When we did Behold the Whatsis, that was a lot of fun. I did, I wanted to do something to pay homage to Dr. Seuss, who's one of my favorite authors, and whose style and just incredible originality I really, really appreciate. And so that was a lot of fun, and I was really thrilled that people seemed to. Like I said, it was kind of a crazed year. Really, strange things happened, both with the company and here just. Like amongst my family, I lost my grandmother. We lost 2 dogs. Like it was just 2019 was a weird year, man. Lissa, I thought Lissa was a really cool project. I felt. I think that I think we probably overthought it, and so we tried to do a lot, and people didn't really go for it. But I think that the idea of doing like this strange surgical funeral home zombie kind of thing, I still think that was a concept that was super cool, and regardless of what people thought of it, I stand behind the fact that it was definitely not like anything else. But,
well, I'm sorry to hear that 2019 was a rough year. But...
Well, 2020 will be better. Let's go with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that leads me, I guess, to wrap things up. What are some things you hope to see in 2020?
We're going to do more soft hearts. I've been really enjoying doing the soft heart series. I get to do, kind of funky things with minimal risk. One of the problems with doing what I do is I'll have like this really interesting idea for something and I can't show it off because there's a huge financial risk involved in doing something super strange for a full soap release, because you make like, you make a whole lot of soap, you make a whole lot of aftershave, you ship it all over the world, and then maybe you put all this money in and it just like falls flat and just dies. So, or people come out and they're like, it sucks, how dare you do this? I mean, like, nobody knows better than I do the experiences that one can have when people don't like your product. So the nice thing about the Soft Heart series is that we do like 100 jars, and I could do something that's kind of freaky that I don't know if people are going to like it or not. Like a hazelnut. I had no idea whether people were going to like a hazelnut or not. I thought it was really cool. There are so many fun things that you can do in fragrance, and like you can do it in perfume and do like 50 bottles, and at say $200 a pop, you recoup your cost, and it's fine. Shaving soap is a different thing. You can't charge $200 for a jar of shaving soap. People will burn you in effigy. So it's a bit more of a risk to do things that are kind of weird, but the Soft Hearts series sort of ameliorated the problem. So we're going to do more of those, and some of them are going to be like resurrections of older fragrances. Like there's sort of a mini call on Reddit for us to do a new release of Rhapsody. I might consider that. That could be cool. Like I miss Rhapsody. I think it's a neat fragrance. I always thought so. We're going to do. We're going to do something for this year. We're not doing, because people have asked me, are we going to bring back Behold the Whatsis? We're not going to do that. We're going to do something more geared toward children's television instead. Like Mr. Rogers, Captain Kangaroo, Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, that kind of thing. Because I'm a big Jim Henson fan. I think Jim Henson was just like one of the most incredibly visionary artists of the 20th century, and his overall effect on culture and entire generations of people, it just cannot be overstated. And so I and Mr. Rogers too. I mean, like they were pioneers in very different ways. I mean, like watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood versus The Dark Crystal, but they both stood for something very specific, and they were both very good at what they did, and they both had a lasting impact on entire generations of children in a way that I don't know that we will see again for quite some time. I mean, like they were singular influences. So I think that'll be really cool. We're going to bring Terror back. I've gotten a bunch of questions. Are you going to bring Terror back? Yes, we will bring Terror back. No, I will not do an EDT. That would be very strange. Well, the thing about it is that, like,
what? Who asked? Okay, actually, never mind. I saw that question. Yeah.
People ask for EDTs for everything that they like, and I understand that. Like, they want to be able to smell it all day, and that's completely cool. Like, I totally get that instinct. Sometimes you just can't do it, and sometimes you just shouldn't do it. In the case of Terror, I think it's both. I definitely can't do it. Because Terror is largely frankincense, and frankincense is really volatile as an oil. So, like, it would be gone inside of an hour. And then I'd get angry emails. Well, it's gone. Well, I mean, like, yeah, that's what's going to happen here. And so I don't want people to be mad at me. And I'd rather not deliver something that's going to be lacking. I mean, like, that's not what we do. So, Terror Raid has been super cool. We're still making Terror Raid. I actually just restocked it today. I think it's cool to be able to add a completely scentless cooling agent to your shaves. Because, like, I hate the smell of menthol, personally. And people are like, why don't you do more menthol soaps? It's like, that's why, because I absolutely hate the smell of menthol. But these new gen cooling agents have no smell at all, and that's really cool. And I kind of like the cooling sensation, but I hate the burning fumes and the overpowering smell from menthol crystals. And so I'm generally not terribly fond of mentholated products in general. Let's see. Probably going to do a new label for Leviathan. People got really mad, including you. And like
I liked it.
I thought it was cool. The thing was that, like, Mike came to me and he's like, "Hey, I really want to paint a soap cap for you."
Shout out to Michael Furr. Okay,
he's awesome. I love Michael. He's so much fun. And so he said, "I really want to paint a soap cap for you." He said, "I really like what you do." He said, I've been painting for a while, and I think it'd be really cool." And I said, "Okay." So I took a look at his art and I was like, "Wow, this is out there." And he's like, he uses vivid color, and like it's just crazy. And like, thank God I wasn't on acid when I opened that gallery, because I would not have known what to do with myself. But I was so into just the complete departure from pretty much everything else I had seen in art, that I was like, well, do you want to do a label for us? And he was like, oh my God, that'd be awesome. And so, I decided that it would fit with Leviathan. And when he explained what everything represented, it made complete sense. And I tried to explain it to other people and couldn't quite get the point across. So, message received. People don't like it. I don't think we're going to go back to the original Ouroboros label. I think what we'll do instead is we'll probably try to do a new label that incorporates the Ouroboros in some way. That's sort of a callback to the earlier design, but is still, something a little different and something a little newer. But
can we expect new Leviathan, in particular, just having the new art, and then the text was just kind of just like very, very small? Do we expect that in other labels to be more art forward than text forward?
Honestly, it varies from label to label. I don't really put any particular emphasis on something being art forward or text forward unless there's like a really good reason to do it. Mm-hmm. Like Hallows is very much art forward. If you go back and look at all the different designs we ever did for Hallows, they're all very art forward. Especially the one that's the skull with the nails in it. And I got to be honest, just brief story about that. I was working with a graphic design firm at the time, and I've since stopped working with them because they proved to be really difficult. But when they pitched that to me, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. What they did not tell me was that it was an actual post-mortem x-ray.
Oh.
And so somebody on Reddit discovered this and was like, yeah, this came from, and this was how I found out. He's like, yeah, this came from the New York City coroner's office. And I was like, whoa, I'm sorry, excuse me? And we'd already sold like a lot of it. Like there was nothing I could do. And I went back to them and was like, guys, you took an actual postmortem x-ray and did this? And they're like, well, we added more nails. Thank you. That totally makes it better. But yeah, I mean, like that one especially was really art forward. People, you know, I got emails from people. They were like, hey, I have little children. I don't want to buy this. I was like, I completely understand that. I take no offense. You know, and for a few people, I actually shipped them like label-less jars of Hallows, so that we didn't like scare their kids. But you know, there's no set principle regarding how art or text forward something is at any given time. It's just kind of what looks good. And like I do a lot of the label design myself, and it's just kind of how I think it ought to look, as opposed to like a set design principle. We've gone through contortions to put it out there, and it's one of those things where it's like, do we really want to do this anymore?
And
I actually
sorry, go ahead.
No, continue, please.
I was saying, that's in regards to the fragrance of it, correct? Like was it the components of the fragrance, or?
Yeah, the components of the fragrance are difficult to get. It sort of comes and goes. Cocoa Absolute seems to fluctuate in availability, which I'm sure is due to the fact that cocoa is probably a failing crop due to global climate change, because I don't think we're going to have cocoa in like 30 years. But the other thing is that it's just been fraught with logistical problems. I mean, like for a while I would joke with people that I thought it was cursed, because it was crazy. Like everything that could go wrong did. Like the year we did the skull with the nails, the graphic design firm that I was working with had been put in charge of like procuring all the labels and everything. And it turned out that they had only ordered like half of what we needed. And I discovered this 4 days before the launch.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh my God. So it was so weird that like so many things would go wrong, and we would have to scramble to make sure that, things held up. I mean, of the original production run of 25 pieces, I think they were pucks. We weren't even using jars then. 2 were destroyed in transit, and then 1 just evaporated off the face of the earth. Like we shipped it to Scotland, and apparently the postal carrier like gave it to the hairdresser who was supposed to give it to the bartender who was supposed to keep it for this guy, and it just disappeared. And he sent me this angry email. He's like, well, you need to replace it. And I was like, dude, they say it was delivered. He's like, well, I didn't get it. The hairdresser didn't give it to the pub keeper so that I could pick it up. And I was like, all right. And so I went back and forth with this guy for like 2 weeks and ended up having to call the Edinburgh Supply Depot. And let me tell you, calling a Scottish postal worker at like 4:30 in the afternoon for them is a very weird experience. They're like, what the hell do you want? But like, it was weird because it just like set the tone for the entirety of Hallows for its several releases. Like every time we would release it, some bizarre thing would go wrong. And we'd be like, oh my God, what the hell happened? Like when the website crashed, and we were ready to go. We had made all the stock we thought we had to make. We were ready to go. Everything had been wrapped and prepared. And we put the thing up and we watched it come down immediately. And I looked at Mom and I was like, oh crap. this is gonna be bad, and it was really bad. And there was, unfortunately, like there was nothing we could do to stop it. Like it was a technical failure on the part of Shopify, and there was nothing that we could do. Like we couldn't even shut it off.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Was that a matter of like overloading, or just some fluke of like it just
coincidence?
As
Hallow's curse.
Yeah, as I understand it, the way that it happened was that so many people hit the website at the same time that they ended up buying it out from under each other, which is supposed to be impossible. But Shopify was like, well, because of how the stock system works, it's held for like 5 minutes. So it would like intermittently go out of stock over the course of like 2 hours. And then like a bunch of these 5-minute hold aside things would expire, and it would like drop a bunch of stock back into the queue. It was a mess. And I was like, oh my God, what the hell is happening? And they're like, yeah, it's kind of your problem. And I was like, well, thank you. You're a multi-billion-dollar company and this is how you treat me. But unfortunately we're a little too wedded to Shopify to let go of them. So the cost to change systems and be like, guys, we're sorry that this happened. It won't happen again. We will make every effort to make sure that this never happens again. But unfortunately, there was nothing we could have done. So people were mad. Like people were really pissed off, and I understand why. And like if I didn't know what had happened and was just watching this thing from the other end, I'm sure I would have been pissed off too. But unfortunately, we couldn't turn it off.
That's crazy. That's very, very crazy. So you're saying Hallows is coming back before the fall?
Shh. Bite your tongue. I know where you live, John.
Don't say anything. Just like no announcement, nothing.
It just pops up one day.
Pops up
like Kanye.
Like that's the thing nowadays. Just like
there you go.
No one asked for it. Beyonce dropped her album out of nowhere.
Yeah,
there you go.
And
there you
things
go.
like that.
I think you actually, if anyone could pull it off, Will. I think because through the grapevine, Reddit especially, man, we find out about stuff like quick. So like, oh my God, guys, go B&M site.
Yep.
You should try
it.
Yep.
Well, I mean, like a few people have been annoyed that I don't make email announcements about Soft Heart.
Yeah. I saw.
I do it. I saw that. But I do it for that reason, because I'm really concerned, because like it's such a limited run, and the idea that it's supposed to be really flexible and a limited thing, like I said, so that we can do these kind of freaky things and aren't putting ourselves up against the wall in the process. But the reason that I don't send emails is that I don't want what happened with Hallows to happen with the Soft Hearts, where people are buying product out from under each other, because that would be a real problem. And so what I tell people is, unfortunately, it's kind of a first come, first served sort of thing. Like I'll give you a heads up 2 days before. I'll put it on Facebook. I'll put it on Instagram. I'll put it on Reddit. But I mean, to send an email to thousands of people to tell them that these 100 jars of soap are available just seems like a really, really bad idea.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time, for talking to me and Gerard tonight. It was just great kind of hearing some stories, just how fragrance has been really a part of your life.
It was my pleasure.
We just want to wish you, for both Barrister and Mann, especially Berceuse, a very successful 2020.
Thank you.
And we're very excited to see what comes out from both your ventures.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. You can find links to Barrister and Mann and Berceuse Perfumes in the show notes. You can also find the social media links for Gerard and myself in the links below. Lather Talk is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you may download your podcasts. We want to thank you for your time and hope you'll join us next episode. See you then.